Have you ever looked at a family photo and wondered why your own smile seems a little out of place, as if you're just passing through the scene? My name is Elise Tran, and for as long as I can remember, I was the invisible one. I was the second child, neither the celebrated eldest nor the cherished youngest. At family gatherings, my name was often lost beneath my siblings' achievements, and my small victories faded quietly into the background, like sunlight behind heavy curtains. Somewhere along the line, I stopped expecting anyone to notice. My sister Vivian shone so brightly, valedictorian debate champion, the one who always seemed to have the right answer. My little brother Ethan was our family's golden boy, the comic relief mom's gentle helper. But me, I became the one who slipped out of conversations unnoticed, the one who set the table, but never had her favorite dish remembered. My parents weren't cruel, just busy. Busy building a new life in America. Busy chasing dreams that sometimes felt too big for our small Brooklyn apartment. I remember one Thanksgiving when I got an A on my first college essay. I was so proud, my hands shaking as I held up the paper. But dinner was already filled with stories of Vivian's internship at a famous law firm and Ethan's latest soccer trophy. My paper and my happiness quietly returned to my bedroom drawer. I learned to celebrate alone. It hurt, but I told myself it was okay. Maybe this was just how some families worked. After all, wasn't I lucky to have food on the table and parents who tried so hard? But sometimes the greatest loneliness isn't being alone. It's feeling unseen in a crowded room. At school I was quiet but curious, the one teachers liked but rarely remembered. When friends invited me over, I saw how different their homes felt, how their moms hugged them for no reason, how their dads always saved the last slice of pizza just for them. I started to wonder if maybe I was meant to be a supporting character in someone else's story. If you've ever felt like that, like your value is measured only by the space you take up or the things you do for others, you're not alone. There's a silent pain in being overlooked, but also a secret strength that begins to grow in the shadows. This is the story of how I learned to see myself even when no one else seemed to notice. It's about finding hope not in applause, but in the quiet places where courage is born. So before we go any further, I want to ask, have you ever wondered what you could become if you stopped waiting for permission to shine? What if invisibility was never a curse, but the beginning of something extraordinary? Let me take you back to the start, back to the Brooklyn apartment where my story began, and the family dinner table, where I first learned that even in the shadows, a spark can take root and grow. Growing up, I thought the best way to keep peace was to keep quiet. My parents, like many who came to America hoping for a better life, valued hard work and humility. I learned early that making waves, asking for more attention, more praise, more space, felt selfish, even disrespectful. So I became good at fading into the background. I was the peacekeeper, the silent helper, the one who always gave in so others could win. At first it didn't seem like much of a price, but over the years I realized that every time I bit back my words, I lost a little bit of myself. The moment I remember most clearly was at my college graduation. I had worked 2 jobs to help pay my tuition, spent countless nights hunched over textbooks, and had just received a special honor for my thesis on educational technology. That day, I wore my cap and gown, with pride, searching the audience for my family. My parents arrived late, apologizing for traffic, their arms full of flowers for Vivian, who by coincidence was speaking at a nearby conference. When the ceremony ended, I found them chatting with her, barely glancing at my diploma. I tried to laugh it off, but something inside me ached. That night at dinner, my father made a toast. "To Vivian, who will make this family proud," he said, lifting his glass. No mention of my hard-earned degree, no words for the hours I'd spent trying to live up to their expectations. I remember staring at my plate, feeling smaller than ever, wondering if my effort would ever matter. It was then that I understood silence doesn't protect you, it erases you. The more I swallowed my voice, the more invisible I became. Sometimes people confuse humility with acceptance. But there's a quiet danger in letting your dreams shrink to fit someone else's story. Looking back, I wish I'd spoken up sooner, not with anger, but with honesty. I wish I had said I matter too. The truth is, when we keep silent to avoid conflict, we end up carrying the conflict inside ourselves. We become experts at hiding disappointment, at pretending we're satisfied with scraps of affection. But the price of peace when it's built on silence is losing the chance to be truly known. That was the day my voice finally broke. I didn't yell or cry. I simply started to ask for what I needed little by little. It wasn't easy. The first time I told my mother how proud I was of myself, her reaction was puzzled silence. The second time she nodded distractedly. But with each small act of courage, I felt my sense of self return. I learned that validation from others is sweet, but self-respect is what carries you through the nights when no one's watching. I found power in my words, even when they trembled. If you've ever felt the urge to hold your tongue just to keep others comfortable, know this: your voice is worth hearing. Even a whisper can change the shape of a room. I wish someone had told me earlier that you can be gentle and still take up space, that you can love your family and still stand up for yourself. Silence kept me safe, but it also kept me small. Stepping out of it was scary, but it was the first step toward becoming visible. And so when the time came to leave home and start my own life, I carried that lesson with me. I left not with bitterness, but with the hope that somewhere out there I could build a space where my story mattered. That was the beginning of my real journey. A journey not just to find success, but to find my own voice. And in Boston, a city brimming with strangers and new possibilities, I would learn just how far that voice could take me. Starting over in Boston felt both terrifying and strangely hopeful. The city hummed with possibility, but I was completely alone for the first time. My apartment was tiny, just enough room for a bed, a battered desk, and a single window that looked out onto a row of brick buildings. On nights when the city lights flickered, I'd press my forehead to the glass and remind myself that every big story begins with a small step. No one knew me here, and at times, that was both a blessing and a burden. I was free from expectations, but also from support. I worked 2 jobs, pouring coffee in the early mornings and shelving books at a campus library after class. Sometimes the hours blurred together so much that I'd forget the taste of home-cooked food or the comfort of family traditions. There were birthdays I spent alone, lighting a candle in a store-bought cupcake, whispering wishes into the darkness. But there was also a quiet pride in paying my rent with my own hands, in making it through the month, with just enough left over for a secondhand coat or a new book. I was invisible, but I was surviving. What surprised me most was how loneliness slowly transformed into strength. I met other students who had stories like mine, kids from small towns, new immigrants, people who knew what it was to start with nothing. We shared late-night study sessions, ramen dinners, and the silent understanding that we were all building something from scratch. I learned that the absence of family support didn't mean the absence of love. It just meant I had to look for it in unexpected places. Sometimes home was a conversation in the laundry room or a smile from a stranger on the bus. I realized that being overlooked by my family had given me a quiet resilience. There was no safety net if I failed, no one to call if I couldn't pay my bills or if my dreams crashed. But each struggle became a lesson in self-reliance. I learned how to ask for help when I truly needed it, and how to trust my own instincts when no one else was watching. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. My life wasn't full of big celebrations, but every small victory belonged to me alone, and that was enough. If you've ever felt like you were building your life in the shadows, remember that those shadows can shape you. They teach you grit, patience, and the power of persistence. It's easy to envy people who seem to have everything handed to them. But there's something quietly heroic about creating your own foundation brick by brick. Looking back, I wouldn't trade those solitary nights or humble jobs for anything. They were the chapters where I learned to rely on myself, to believe that my story was worth telling, even if no one else was listening yet. Those years in Boston planted a seed of independence I never knew I had. They taught me that the journey isn't about the applause, it's about becoming strong enough to clap for yourself. That sense of quiet pride would become the fuel for my next chapter. I didn't know it then, but every struggle was preparing me for a bigger leap, a leap into the world of startups, innovation, and risks no one thought I'd dare to take. And with that, my story was about to change in ways no one, not even myself, could have predicted. No one expects much from someone who keeps their head down. In the fast-paced halls of my university and the crowded back rooms of my part-time jobs, I learned how easy it was to be overlooked. But in that invisibility, something surprising began to grow. A hunger to prove, at least to myself, what I was capable of. I didn't have family cheering me on or investors lining up with open wallets. I had only my ideas and an endless stack of notebooks, each page scribbled with plans, sketches, and hopeful beginnings. My first real risk came in my junior year when I joined a team to build a language learning app for underprivileged schools. I poured months into coding and outreach, convinced we'd change the world. But the pilot flopped. Schools didn't have the right devices, the kids found the app confusing, and our funding ran out in weeks. The sting of failure was sharp, but it was also clarifying. I realized that real innovation doesn't come from a perfect plan. It comes from listening, adapting, and daring to start again when things fall apart. Instead of hiding from the failure, I asked every teacher and student what went wrong. Their answers were honest sometimes, painfully so. But each piece of criticism became a lesson. I spent long nights learning about user design and accessibility, reaching out to mentors who had walked this path before. My second attempt, a simpler reading tool, wasn't glamorous, but it worked. The kids loved it, and a small education nonprofit noticed. They offered a tiny grant and a big dose of encouragement. It was the first time anyone outside myself believed in what I was building. I think a lot of people give up too soon, especially when the world seems indifferent. The truth is, failure is a better teacher than success if you let it be. My setbacks taught me to adapt, to ask for feedback, and to see being underestimated as a gift. When no one is watching, you're free to experiment, to stumble, and try again away from the harsh glare of judgment. The feeling of quietly fixing your own mistakes is empowering in ways applause can never be. If you're working on something that no one understands or notices, don't lose heart. Some seeds need darkness to grow. My early flops and tiny wins in Boston taught me more about grit than any classroom ever could. I learned to respect the process, to embrace mistakes, savor small improvements, and keep going even when every sign says to stop. That perseverance would soon become my greatest strength, shaping my path far beyond the university library. Looking back, I see those years not as wasted effort, but as the forging of resilience. I didn't know it then, but that tenacity would become the foundation of Trantech, the company I would someday build. But in those early days, all I wanted was one chance to prove that my ideas mattered. As the city changed seasons outside my window, I promised myself I wouldn't let one failure or 100 keep me from starting again. The journey ahead would be full of risks, but for the first time I was ready to take them on my own terms. When you build something from nothing, every small win feels monumental. Trantech didn't start in a glass office or with venture capital. It began with a borrowed laptop, late-night coffee, and a simple goal: make learning accessible for every child, no matter their background. At first, Trantech was just me and a few friends huddled around old monitors in the back of a university library. We pooled what little money we had, working nights and weekends, guided by hope and necessity more than business plans. Most people didn't even know my name. I was the founder nobody saw coming. For months, Trantech was invisible to the outside world. We focused on building useful tools for real classrooms, not flashy demos for investors. I reached out to teachers, quietly asked what they needed, and then tweaked our software until it actually worked for their students. We launched our pilot quietly in a handful of local schools. There were no headlines, no awards, just handwritten notes from kids who finally found reading fun. Those small successes filled the gaps where approval from my family should have been. Slowly, I learned that impact matters more than attention. Being unseen in the tech world can be an advantage. Without the glare of the spotlight, there was less pressure to impress, less jealousy, and more freedom to take risks. Our team experimented with new features, sometimes failing, sometimes stumbling onto something brilliant. I watched as competitors obsessed with publicity burned out quickly. Trantech grew steadily in the shadows, building trust one classroom at a time. I realized that not every founder needs to be a celebrity. Sometimes the quietest voice can make the loudest change if you listen first and lead second. Still, there were lonely moments. My family rarely asked about my work, and when they did, it was mostly polite curiosity. My sister Vivian was now a rising star in the fashion world, regularly featured in magazines. I sometimes wondered what it would be like to have my achievements celebrated at the dinner table. But then I'd remember a message from a teacher or a photo of a smiling student using our app, and the longing would soften. Trantech was making a difference, even if the world hadn't noticed yet. There's a lesson in quiet growth sometimes. The strongest foundations are built where no one can see. I stopped measuring success by the applause I didn't receive and started appreciating the progress that was real and lasting. Small wins became bricks in the empire I was quietly building, and each act of kindness or innovation shaped what Trantech could become. Invisibility wasn't a curse. It was a cocoon preparing me for the moment when I would have to step forward no longer hidden and claim the power I had earned. That moment would come sooner than I ever imagined. Trantech was about to catch the attention of people far beyond my little circle. As new opportunities appeared and old wounds resurfaced, I'd be forced to choose stay safely invisible or risk everything by stepping into the light. The next chapter of my story would unfold, not in quiet library corners, but in the dazzling and sometimes dangerous spotlight of public recognition. Vivian's invitation to her fashion gala arrived on thick embossed paper, a symbol of her new status. Family only at red and gold letters, but I knew my place. Still, I wanted to believe things could change. I bought a simple dress, did my hair, and practiced a smile in the mirror. When I arrived, the room sparkled with crystal chandeliers and well-dressed guests, every conversation sprinkled with names and brands I barely recognized. Vivian welcomed me with a practiced hug, her eyes scanning the room for bigger fish. I felt invisible again, a wallflower at my own sister's celebration. As the evening unfolded, I drifted along the edges, refilling my sparkling water, watching as Vivian charmed her sponsors and basked in praise. At one point, her husband, a sharp-tongued investor named Derek, caught my eye across the buffet. He smirked. "Did you bring your business cards, Elise? Or are you just here to serve drinks?" A few people snickered. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I stayed silent, my practiced peacekeeper smile never slipping. The memory of old family dinners returned me. Expected to help, expected to stay quiet, expected to never outshine. I wish I could say the moment passed, but the sting lingered. Later, I overheard Vivian laughing with friends about dreamers who play at business. Her words were careless, but they landed hard. I realized that for some, I'd always be the overlooked sibling, the safe bet, the one who makes everyone else look better by comparison. But beneath the embarrassment, a different feeling started to grow resolve. I remembered all the kids Trantech had helped, faces that lit up because of something I built. That pride, quiet but steady, began to outweigh the shame. In that room, surrounded by people obsessed with image, I saw how dangerous appearances can be. I thought of other children from immigrant families who measure their worth in silent sacrifices. Sometimes the world rewards only what it can see: labels, awards, polished speeches. But real value isn't always visible. The ones who clean up quietly after the party are often the ones who kept it from falling apart. I promised myself not to let their blindness become my story. For the first time, I understood that respect is earned not from applause, but from authenticity. There's a lesson in betrayal. It exposes not only others' limitations, but also our own hidden strength. That night, I didn't cause a scene or argue. I simply left with my head high, determined to let my actions speak louder than their dismissals. Sometimes walking away is braver than staying and fighting for crumbs of validation. The pain of that night didn't fade quickly, but it became fuel, a quiet fire, reminding me of what truly matters. Little did I know the very people who dismissed me that evening would soon see just how far I'd come. As Trantech's influence grew, I was about to be pulled into a moment where all the masks would fall, and the truth long hidden would change everything for my family and for me. Change often arrives quietly, then crashes in like a storm. A month after the gala, Trantech's biggest project, an education partnership with the city, made headlines. Suddenly, I was fielding calls from reporters, investors, and city leaders. My name appeared in articles linked to impact and innovation, but I kept the spotlight small. Meanwhile, in a twist of fate, Derek's investment group was floundering, desperate for a bailout. I had known this for months quietly. Trantech's holding company had been negotiating a possible acquisition to save his firm. I was the silent force on the other end of every contract, hidden behind layers of careful business. The day of the deal arrived in a marble conference room high above Manhattan. Derek arrived smug, expecting an easy rescue from some faceless tech executive. When I walked in, his eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment, the room was silent, everyone waiting for introductions. I calmly announced, "I'm Elise Tran, CEO of Trantech." I explained the real terms. Trantech would not be bailing out a company built on arrogance and shortcuts. The air grew thick with shock as I signed the papers canceling the deal right in front of him. A single sentence had the weight of years of silence finally broken. I didn't do it to punish Derek or to seek revenge for old slights. I did it because I knew what Trantech stood for. Our work was about building things that lasted, about trust, integrity, and purpose, not just profit. I looked at Derek and saw a mirror of everyone who had ever underestimated me. In that moment, I was not invisible. The balance of power had shifted not with anger or drama, but with quiet certainty. Every silent struggle, every night spent working when no one cared, had led to this. The fallout came quickly. News of the canceled deal spread through industry circles. Vivian's fashion firm, already shaky, lost a crucial investor, one linked to Trantech's network. My family was stunned. There were phone calls, emails, even a few angry messages. Some relatives accused me of betrayal. Others were suddenly eager to reconnect to ask about our success. Through it all, I stayed grounded, reminding myself why I had chosen this path. The victory felt bittersweet, but also freeing. I no longer needed to prove my worth to those who never saw it. There's a lesson in finally being seen. The world can change overnight, but your true value is built over years. Recognition is satisfying, but fleeting. What lasts is the work, the integrity behind it, and the courage to walk away from anything that threatens it. The collapse of Derek's empire was not just an end, it was a beginning. For the first time, I felt the full weight and freedom of my own choices. In the aftermath, I was faced with new questions. Could I forgive those who had hurt me? Could I build something lasting without losing myself in the process? As Trantech continued to grow and my family struggled to adjust, I realized the next challenge wasn't about business, but about healing. The story wasn't over, it was just entering its most important chapter. The days following the deal's collapse were a blur of headlines, phone calls, and uneasy silence. Derek's firm began to unravel almost overnight. Board members, resigned employees, panicked, and lawsuits soon followed. Vivian's fashion company, already on uncertain footing, lost key partnerships as news of Derek's downfall rippled through their circle. Our family group chat, once a trickle of polite messages, erupted with accusations and confusion. My parents called again and again, voices strained and searching for explanations. Suddenly the roles were reversed. The daughter they had overlooked became the only one who could offer answers in a world turned upside down. In private, the conversations were raw and unguarded. Vivian, once so confident, sat across from me with tears in her eyes. "How did it come to this?" she whispered. For the first time, I saw not the glamorous sister, but a woman weighed down by fear and regret. I explained my reasons gently, how Trantech had to stand by its values, how rescuing Derek's firm would have endangered everything we'd built. She listened in silence, then asked, was I really that blind? It was an honest question, one I had waited years to hear. The space between us finally felt real, stripped of pretense. My parents' reaction was more complicated. They struggled to accept that the daughter they'd underestimated now held the power to change all their fortunes. My mother cried, apologizing for years of indifference, while my father tried to justify his old ways, insisting he'd only wanted the best for us all. I realized in that moment how difficult it is for some people to let go of pride, to admit they'd missed what truly mattered. It wasn't easy to forgive, but I tried to meet their pain with empathy instead of anger. Healing, I learned, isn't a straight line. Through it all, I discovered that family isn't just about blood or tradition, it's about honesty and the courage to be seen as you are. For years, I'd hidden my struggles to protect them from disappointment, but true connection could only begin with truth. As the noise of scandal faded, we started having quieter, more honest conversations about failures, about dreams, about what we wanted from each other. These talks weren't perfect, but they were real. In the ruins of old expectations, something new and fragile began to grow, a tentative hope for understanding. The lesson I carried from this chapter was simple but powerful. When the masks fall and the old stories break, there's a chance to begin again. Pain can make space for empathy, and disappointment can turn into forgiveness if we're willing to look each other in the eye. I didn't know what our family would become, but I was ready to build something better, one honest word at a time. With the weight of the past lifting, I began to see possibilities I'd never imagined. Trantech's work continued, but now I wanted to use my influence not just for business, but for real change, starting with my own family and reaching out to those who needed a second chance. The next steps would be about more than success. They'd be about creating a new kind of legacy rooted in both courage and compassion. In the aftermath of all that loss and revelation, I found myself rethinking what it meant to succeed and what it meant to belong. For so long, I'd been chasing milestones, hoping they'd buy me acceptance, not just from the world, but from my own family. Now I realized the real work was rebuilding from the inside out. Vivian, with her pride humbled, asked if she could help at Trantech, even if it meant starting from the ground up. We created a mentorship program for young women, sharing not just our expertise, but the hard lessons we'd each learned about failure and resilience. Working together was awkward at first. Vivian brought a designer's eye and a knack for big-picture thinking, while I stayed rooted in details and day-to-day progress. Sometimes old tensions resurfaced, but we learned to name them rather than letting them fester. One afternoon after a difficult meeting, Vivian left a note on my desk. "I never really saw you before. Thank you for giving me another chance." That simple gesture meant more than any award or headline. I finally understood healing is a process of small steps taken together with patience and humility on both sides. My parents, too, found new roles in my life. My mother started volunteering at a community literacy program. Trantech sponsored teaching English to immigrant families, who reminded her of her own journey years ago. My father, slower to change, sometimes visited the office just to sit quietly and observe. We never erased the past, but our conversations became more honest, less about achievements, more about support. I learned to share my doubts and fears with them instead of just my successes. Slowly, we were becoming a family that valued presence over perfection. The most profound lesson of this time was that family can be chosen as much as inherited. Alongside my relatives, I built a wider circle of belonging friends who showed up in hard moments, mentors who believed in me, and young leaders from Trantech who saw possibility where others saw problems. We celebrated every victory, no matter how small, together. The company itself became a kind of chosen family rooted in shared vision and kindness. Success, I learned, is not about applause or money, but about the lives you touch and the love you help grow. Looking back, I saw that everything I'd built was stronger for having been tested. The fractures in our family let the light in, revealing possibilities none of us had imagined. The next step wasn't just about business or redemption, it was about creating a legacy of generosity, courage, and belonging. With Trantech thriving and my heart finally at peace, I turned my focus to the future, ready to help others find their own voices and their own place in the world. Looking back, I see a journey not marked by trophies or perfect family photos, but by countless small acts of courage, learning to speak up, to forgive, and to rebuild from the ruins of old expectations. From a quiet childhood spent on the sidelines to the first time I risked failure for something I believed in, every chapter shaped the woman I am today. Each setback was a lesson, each lonely night in Boston a brick in the foundation of Trantech, and each painful family conversation a step toward real connection. My story is proof that the shadows can be where resilience is born. Through every moment of being overlooked or dismissed, I learned the true meaning of value. It isn't found in applause, but in honest work and authentic relationships. Trantech's impact is measured not by profit, but by the children learning to read, the women finding their voices, and the families who start believing in new possibilities. My family, once fractured by pride, now grows stronger with each honest conversation. I discovered that real legacy comes not from what you build for yourself, but from what you inspire in others. The courage to stand tall even when it would be easier to stay hidden. If you've ever felt invisible, remember that your story matters. Your pain and your perseverance are shaping something powerful even if no one sees it yet. Don't wait for permission to shine or for someone else to give you your worth. You are the author of your own life, and the world needs your unique voice and vision. Every small act of honesty, every effort to connect is another spark in the darkness. Your journey, however quiet, has the power to change lives, starting with your own. Thank you for sharing this time and space with me. If this story resonated with you, if you saw a part of yourself in these words, I invite you to join our community. Please like, subscribe, and share your own story in the comments below. Your voice could be the encouragement someone else is waiting for. Together, let's build a legacy of courage and belonging where no one is left invisible, and every story finds the light it deserves.